Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Francisco Aragon, and I direct Letras Latinas, the literary initiative at Notre Dame's Institute for Latino Studies. Welcome to day 2 of Afro-Latinx Poetry Now. If today's sessions are anything like yesterday's, I think we can agree that we're in for another truly memorable and, I would argue, historic experience. To those of you who were present yesterday, my apologies if some of these remarks ring a bit repetitious, but gatherings on this scale are simply not possible without our funders. In addition to our co-presenting sponsor, the Initiative on Race and Resilience, other campus sponsors include the Institute for Scholarship and the Liberal Arts, specifically their Henkel's Lecture Fund. I mentioned them first because the in-house grant we received from them accounts for about 40% of the total budget. The remaining sponsors and private benefaction make up the rest, and they are the Department of Africana Studies, the Creative Writing Program, the Department of English, the Literature of Annihilation, Exile, and Resistance Initiative, the Department of Romance, Languages, and Literature, the Jose E. Fernandez Hispanic Caribbean Studies Initiative, the Department of American Studies, and the Graduate School. As I intimated yesterday, private benefaction was responsible for the poets' honoraria, the lion's share of which was provided by our special patron, Jim Wilson, who is with us today from Washington, D.C. And now to our session. In yesterday's installment of Poets on Poets, we heard luminous words on the work of the late Lorenzo Thomas, Aracelis Germay, and Nancy Morejon. This afternoon, we'll be hearing about 3 additional poets, and these remarks will be delivered by poet, writer, and playwright Jasminne Mendez, poet, writer, and independent publisher Roberto Carlos Garcia, and poet, editor, and superlative educator Raina J. León. Again, one of Letras Latinas' flagship initiatives is the Andrés Montoya Poetry Prize, and I am proud to say that our first speaker, Jasminne Mendez, was a finalist for the prize.
And not today.
Thankfully, her finalist manuscript did find a home and was picked up by Noemi Press and became part of another Letras Latinas publishing program, a co-publishing venture called the Acrylica series, which highlights innovative Latinx writing. The title in question, City Without Altar, which includes a play in verse, went on to be produced at Milagro Theater in Portland last spring. In addition to her work as a poet, Jasminne also distinguishes herself as a writer of creative nonfiction and, more recently, children's literature. Her novel in verse, Añana del Mar Jumps In, is set for release in March of next year with Dial Books. One of the things I've really grown to appreciate about Jasminne is her passion as an advocate for Afro-Latinx voices. In the article published in The Observer this week, she says, quote, "I think that my goal as a writer and performer is to try to expand people's view and understanding of what Blackness is and how it exists in the world and across the diaspora." Close quote. I've had the pleasure of teaching the work of Roberto Carlos Garcia at Notre Dame for 2 years now, and he's been a virtual guest in my class, as well as a guest in a course taught by my colleague in Romance Languages, Maricel Moreno, who we'll hear in our next session on Roberto's work. I'm pleased to say that Roberto's brand new book, a selected poems he titles What Can I Tell You, makes its debut here at Notre Dame at Afro-Latinx Poetry Now. But in addition to a fine poet, Roberto is also an essayist, and he has a forthcoming collection from Northwestern University Press titled Traveling Freely. He's also an exemplary literary citizen in his role as an independent publisher. In fact, it was Get Fresh Books that picked up another Andres Montoya Poetry Prize finalist, the 2021 title, Things to Pack on the Way to Everywhere, by Grisel Yolanda Acosta, which has also been taught in Notre Dame classrooms.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Dr. Grisel Acosta.
Dr. Grisel Acosta. I can't pinpoint, like I did with John Murillo yesterday, the first time I met Raina J. León. But as I briefly hinted at, Raina J. León was one of the so-called Ragdale Eight, the term we coined in the fall of 2010 when 8 Latinx poet editors were in community for one entire week. In fact, for the record, and as a way of highlighting how gatherings like this one can reverberate, it was during that week in Lake Forest, Illinois in 2010 that the aforementioned Acrylica series was born. Conversations with Carmen Jimenez-Smith and J. Michael Martinez lit that fuse. But back to Raina. Why was she there? Because of the transformational work she was doing, is still doing with Accentos Review? With Accentos Review.
15 years almost.
And I'll close with this. A few years ago, in one of my 2 rare appearances in my native San Francisco on the occasion of a reading I gave at Galeria de la Raza on 24th Street in the Mission, Raina made the trek from the East Bay to come hear me. That's Raina. Please join me in welcoming to the podium in succession Jasminne Mendez, Roberto Carlos Garcia, and Raina J. León.
Thank you, Francisco. Thank you, attendees, fellow poets, scholars, academics, students, tech folk, Notre Dame, benefactors, donors, all the people. Thank you. I'm just so lucky to be here. I don't know if y'all realize this, but like, we're real life friends. Like, we're poets, but we're also like real life friends. And I think it's just so magical that we're here in this space together and that we made it, that we're here, that we're still here. And I'm going to stop before I start crying, even before my talk, because I was ready to do this. So thank you for having me. I'm very lucky to be here. My writing style is like a mother possum with babies on her back, caught in headlights, while trying to cross the road late at night. At first, the sight is rather frightening, a cluster of beady eyes staring back at you, long rat-like tails following behind. But then it grows, hauntingly beautiful, when you realize even the weirdest of things exist on this earth and deserve to live. My poetry is like that, born out of strangeness with an instinct to survive. This is how Dianelly Antigua described her writing style to me when I interviewed her for my Plátano Poetry Cafe blog back in 2018. The Plátano Poetry Cafe blog was a short-lived experiment I undertook in an attempt to highlight the voices, poems, and writing lives of Afro-Latinx poets across the country. You see, I've been doing this work for a long time. I could spend all day telling you about how much and why I love all of these authors up here with me and those who spoke yesterday. That I've gotten to know them through their work, and for those who answered my interview requests, some of you did not, through blog posts, that I've shared meals with all of these writers, taken road trips with some of them, had them stay over at my house for Mexican cooking, which is just tacos with plátanos. And yet, even those whom I've only met once in passing at conferences or workshops, I have championed since day one, regardless of whether we had ever met in person. One such writer, Dianelly, whose work awoke something in me or connected to me and made me feel less alone, less different, less than. Dianelly's work did that in more ways than one. I was first introduced to her via social media through my partner and poet, Lupe Mendez, who came home from Canto Mundo one summer and said, "Hey, I met this Afro-Latina Dominican poet who lives with chronic illness just like you." And back then, all I needed to know about someone to call them a friend was to know that they were either Dominican or lived with chronic illness like me. And she met both of those requirements. And she was a poet. So, of course, I immediately followed her on all social media and felt like she was the coolest poet I had ever met. The complete opposite of me. I liked her witchy photos and at times envied her freedom and fierceness, her expressions of femininity and fearless fashion. She wore plaid miniskirts and nylon stockings with vintage graphic tees. I enjoy long floral skirts and oversized linen tops. She had almost flawless skin, and the tagline on her website is "Little Poet, Big Hair." I have scleroderma and manchas all over my body, and definitely am not cool enough to have a tagline. She was and is a rock star poet. I was and continue to be a folk singer poet. I began to feel like, well, the only thing we have in common is that we are both chronically ill Afro-Dominicanas. After all, her social media showed her bouncing from city to city, winning writerly awards and whisking away to writing retreats in the woods. Meanwhile, here I was, pregnant and bloated, about to begin my journey into motherhood where I had been told one day would blur into the next, where every day was going to be the same. Every day was going to be a cycle of sleep, feed, burp, bounce, change, cry, me and the baby, try to sleep, wake, feed, burp, bounce, rock, change, cry, rinse, wash, repeat. I believed her to be the complete opposite of me. And that's what made her all the more alluring. But then I actually took the time to read her poetry. And I realized that while she may be a physically little poet, her poems are in fact very big. And I realized we had more in common than I would have ever expected. We were both more than just our chronic illness and Afro-Latinidad, more than just our skin color and curly hair, more than just our sadness and our suffering. Shortly before giving birth to my daughter, I reached out to Dianelly and asked her if she would like to be a part of the blog, since her debut poetry collection, Ugly Music, was coming out soon. She said yes, and I was thrilled. Aside from asking a set stock of questions, I also ask each poet to send in a poem that I can share with the interview. And because I believe that it is important to let the poets we are calling forth today the time to speak for themselves, and because we and our ancestors have spent far too many centuries being silenced, I'll share the poem with you and let you hear it in her voice. Hopefully you can see that.
Diary entry number 22, vows. I'm trying to be my own father with a shotgun, but I have a limit. I've been holding too many hands under the table at McDonald's. They are taking all my air. I know we won't reproduce, but I want to believe in a miracle child. My niece, tear in the placenta, and still here. What is it to be so attracted to someone that you want to create a collection? Will they be brown, like me? Will they run barefoot on the kitchen floor, into my arms, to my breasts? I won't turn from their mouths. What if I get sick again? I am chemical in a way. My vertebrae can't recall the point of climax. When my lover said, "Babe, that was a beautiful fucking church," I dropped a cereal box. I'm trying to remember why I'm here. The house with the gables and brick. I am a sinner with feelings, I am the father. A death brings people closer together.
I published Dianelly's interview and poem 3 days after my daughter was born. I'll be honest, I don't know if I had that pre-scheduled or if in some hormone-induced mania while trying not to think about my daughter who was taken to the NICU for being born too small, I worked in the hospital on my laptop post-labor and delivery in the middle of the night. I don't remember. I don't know. What I do know is that reading that poem now, 4 years later, it feels serendipitous, magical, and somehow even clairvoyant in some way, that she would send in that poem and that I would post it right after giving birth. And if she and I were connected, as if she and I were connected in mind and spirit, even before we really knew each other, especially when I read the lines, I want to believe in a miracle child. Will they be brown like me? Will they run barefoot on the kitchen floor into my arms, to my breasts? What if I get sick again? Because my Luz Maria was my miracle child, because I constantly did and still do worry, what if I get sick again? I don't recall reading her poem in the days postpartum. Those days and weeks after having my daughter are a complete blur, just like everyone said they would be. But I do remember the anxiety and worry. And that anxiety still wakes me up at night. And it's as if the universe had and continues to conspire to bring us together on the page, even if not in person. By digging deep and engaging with Dianelly's work, I realized that we not only shared racial and ethnic and disability identity markers, we also shared a longing. We both longed to be mothers. Before having my daughter, I lived with infertility. It took 6 years for me to conceive, and that was only after a miscarriage and IVF. In interviews and in her poems, Dianelly's speakers long to be a mother, like I had longed to be a mother. She and her speakers longed to carry a baby, like I had longed to carry a baby. And yet the question remained, will my body work when it comes time to do the one thing I really want it to do? When I asked her to discuss the inspiration for the poem she submitted, Dianelly said the following. The poem featured here, Diary Entry 22, Vows, uses language collected from my 22nd journal. This project has been a way for me to revisit my past, inform it, and reinvent it. I do not hold the poems to biographical truth, but rather an emotional truth. I'm interested in the obsessions and preoccupations of both the speaker, of my diaries, and of these crafted realities. Most of my poems recently have visited the speakers and, quite frankly, my own obsessions with femininity, procreation, illness, and the ways in which all those obsessions cross paths. Motherhood has always fascinated me, and the question of my ability to ever become a mother has been at the forefront of my mind. I suffer from both physical and mental illness, making the possibility of motherhood a more complicated endeavor. The poem was an exercise in exploring the possibilities and the impossibilities of such an occurrence. This poem of hers, along with others like Re-Education and I'm Almost 30, all reflect on the possibilities and impossibilities of motherhood, which includes not often written about topics like miscarriage and abortion, period blood and period stains, sexual assault and trauma. After I posted Dianelly's interview, I didn't come back to her work for years. We met in person briefly at a Canto Mundo reading in New York in the summer of 2019, but I had brought my daughter and didn't stay to hang out afterwards. So while we were in the same place at the same time, all I managed was a quick hello and an awkward smile. Then the pandemic hit, and we wouldn't be seeing anyone for a long time. While we were both a part of a couple of online readings early on in the lockdown, I didn't engage with her poetry in a meaningful way back then. And I'll be honest, I did buy her book, and I was truly excited about it. But the first few years of motherhood are unforgiving. Add to that a pandemic and no childcare, and reading anything, especially poetry, became impossible. Then, partway through the pandemic, when she won the Whitting Award and someone from the foundation contacted me, they asked if I could do a story on her to publish somewhere. I said yes, with every intention of engaging with her work once more. And yet again, motherhood consumed me and made it impossible. So her book sat on my shelf until I was asked to choose a poet for this summit. And while I read the book at the time and enjoyed it, my brain was still in a haze of survival and stress. anxiety and apathy, because the world was burning around us, and I was just trying to keep me and my family alive. My next almost accidental encounter with her work came in early 2021, when I was asked to judge the best of the net. The poem Luna Luna magazine nominated for the anthology was written by Dianelly, and it was truly exceptional. In her poem titled I'm Almost 30, we see a poet who is attuned to the small details of everyday living, hoping at least some of it will lead to a meaningful life. In it, we hear once again the themes of longing and motherhood, and we also see a speaker who yearns to live, but who is also aware of the tragic fragility of human life. I'm almost 30. I'm almost 30 and give a good blowjob, but can't open a bottle of wine without breaking the cork. I'm almost 30, and in my nightmare, all of my exes are meeting for coffee, like an unlikely family of missed orgasms. And I want to say, I'm almost 30, and 30 other women and I wait in line to pee at a Backstreet Boys concert. And afterwards, we all want the same thing. We all want to fuck a Backstreet Boy tonight. Dear God, I'm almost 30, and I'm lost in a funny thing, like looking so beautiful while the light of the street lamp falls perfectly on my skin, and I've survived. Or how my mother's friend who visited me in the hospital each time is dying of cancer while I run in the street, my lover chasing me barefoot because I'm drunk again. So he takes the keys, so he pulls me inside, and I pretend to sleep on the couch, sneak out when I hear him snoring, drive down Main Street with Klonopin and gin in my belly, and my eyes are almost 30, blurry with unexpected sanity, like when the guest at the restaurant touched my arm as she left, handing me the bill, saying, I can't believe you're almost 30. And with a green speck of Norol still stuck in her teeth, she smiled, told me I was a good waitress, that my energy was warm, and I cried as I bussed the table, because I'm almost 30, and I have so much sin left to live, and more weeks to leave bloodstains on a mattress, when really, I just want to roll up to every funeral like I own it. Sexy to meet Jesus in a white dress, the runs in my nylons all fixed with nail polish, and I'm almost 30, and the people in this town like to watch the piping plovers on the beach, their orange feet skittering across the shoreline like a joy I don't understand, as if the vastness of the Atlantic wasn't the backdrop, as if the water couldn't claim a tiny body for itself, swallow it whole. And when she says Atlantic, I think slave trade, I think hurricane, I think Yemaya, I think wave, I think water, I think motherhood, I think blackness, I think healing, I think life. There is a deep tension that she depicts in this piece. We find it in her longing to feel alive and the death that exists every month in her womb when her period arrives and no baby has been birthed. There is beauty and despair there. Wow. Here is a poet who makes us ask ourselves difficult questions and who takes us by the hand and tells us, feel what I feel. And each and every time we do, because the words she births are beautiful, because the words she births make it possible. In early 2022, we met again, not in person, but in the pages of a book. Around 2019 or so, I was asked to contribute to an anthology on motherhood titled The Long Devotion, edited by Emily Perez and Nancy Reddy. They were looking for poems that could represent a wide range of motherhood experiences. I was thrilled to be included. When I received my contributor's copy and found that Dianelly also had a poem in this collection, I felt honored to find myself along her work. Someone who I had yet to sit down and have an in-person, real-life conversation with, but felt drawn to and connected with regardless. And here she was again, echoing lines from I'm Almost 30, with a poem that is not about miscarriage, but that reminded me of my own. Re-education. I listen to podcasts to learn about feminism, watch porn to make sure I'm doing it right. I dance on the bar because Coyote ugly. because these shoes, this drink, I'm almost 30. And I still think Bloody Mary is a game with a mirror. Sometimes she appears at 2 a.m. Sometimes she's in the toilet, piss reflection before the flush. There is a truth in this magic. The time I took Plan B, then the other time I took Plan B. I bled for 2 months. There could have been a mother in me. I told no one, except the man at Tacos Lupita, who asked what I wanted in my burrito, and I think I said, baby. I think I spun around 3 times and whispered a name, and there was no floor when I fell, when a queen flew from my womb. There was a glass and napkins, and the doctor saying, wake up, wake up. Dianelly's poetry is fierce and fearless, just like her fashion. Whether she's writing about porn or period stains, Plan B or Bloody Marys, Dianelly does so unapologetically and in reverence. Many of her images are also political, cultural, and societal symbols that represent life and death, joy and sorrow, reproductive rights, and bodily autonomy. Dianelly brings these images into the world of her poems because they are a part of our real world, and that is where the speakers in Dianelly's poems live. And while they know they live in a world that is at times cruel and cold, they seek to also find compassion and kindness in it. I'd like to share one last poem with you all and let you see it and hear it in her voice, and then I'll conclude with my final thoughts. Oh, wrong page. Apologies. All right, I'll just pull it up here. Don't know where it went. There we go.
Another poem about nature, but really it's about me. I'm not used to all this nature. The robin and the blue jay perch on the railing outside my window while I sip my coffee. The centipede scurries in the sink next to my dirty spoon. I leave the birds alone, but the centipede has to go. So I name it Ben, after one of my exes, and drown it, send it down the drain. All exes live there, down the drain where they've crawled out of the pipe sludge to the clean stainless steel of the undermount sink. By the way, this is a borrowed kitchen. By the way, this is a borrowed life. I don't belong in a log cabin in the woods where the squirrels are actually startled. I want the don't give a fuck attitude of a New York squirrel eating from the palms of whoever has something to give. The leftover crumbs from the morning's bacon, egg, and cheese, or the last bit of falafel dipped in hummus from Mamoon's. But wasn't that a borrowed life, too? I was supposed to be a preacher's wife, skirt to my ankles, Bible in my purse. And I was supposed to be a mother. The doctors don't know if this body can cradle the egg before it's flushed. And I'm not supposed to be jealous of the birds or the squirrel or the drowned centipede. How easy it was to blame it. Let the water run. Another poem about nature.
Sorry. Don't bring that up. Oh, okay. Both Dianelly and I are always talking about mothers, the ones who birthed us, the ones that came before us, the ones that live inside us, and the ones we wish to become. And even though Dianelly and the speakers in her poems have not carried or birthed a child, we are all mothers. Dianelly mothers her words and her whole self, like I mother myself and my words and my daughter. She carries within her a light, y ella da a luz every time she puts her pen on the page. In her poem, aptly titled, We Never Stop Talking About Our Mothers, Dianelly writes, I don't know the names of the women in my family, past my great-grandmother. How will I call upon them when it is time? Will I call them Mary, or Venus, or Yemaya? I've yet to burn the Palo Santo, the sage. I want to leave behind a legacy of light. I want to leave someone better. Well, Dianelly, you are light. Almost. You are light, and you are better. And you have left me someone better because of your light. In an essay at Poetry Society of America, where Dianelly explains the process of writing the poem, Something Dies in Me Every Month, she says, I am not a mother, but I am certain that a mother lives in me. My feverish need to nurture, yet in turn an equally feverish need to be nurtured. And every month I do indeed have the awkwardest courage. What a gift it is to be ruled by the moon. Such majesty, how it swells pregnant with love, even in the morning sky, an apparition of white in all blue. So, may we all nurture and be nurtured like Dianelly. May we all be like the moon and swell pregnant with love. Thank you.
What's up, everybody? So first, I'm gonna apologize for these ashy elbows because I bought the wrong lotion, and it fits in my bag, but it's weak. It's very weak. Thank you, Francisco, for organizing this. Thank you to everybody involved, top to bottom. Yes, you might have got my back. That's what I'm talking about. I'll see you after. Thank you to everybody involved. I mean, just across the board, okay? It's a lot of names, and I'm sorry if I can't remember them all, but it's been really amazing to spend time with you, and I'm super grateful for all the work that you've put into this event. I can't say that enough. And I'm just in awe to be in the company of my fellow conference mates. We get to interact via social media and stuff, but there's nothing like breaking bread together and listening to each other's voices and being together. And for that, you know, I'm grateful and super humbled. I gotta give a shout out to, you know, our Latina scholars. They're killing it right now, and you need to read everything they're writing. We have Dr. Maricel Moreno, obviously Dr. Yomaira Figueroa Vasquez is here, Dr. Tania Cateri Hernandez, Dr. Loria Garcia Peña, Dr. Vanessa Valdez, obviously Dr. Maricel Moreno, Dr. Raina León, right? Mm-hmm. There's a symbiosis happening between the poetry and the scholarly work that is being done, and it's just amazing. I want to say thank you for that. When I talk about Willie Perdomo's work, I think about the other side of the immigration coin, the side that people don't necessarily want to talk about. There's the kind of success story, right? The immigrant success story. But then there's countless people who are just making it every day in the city, trying to survive in our urban centers or wherever we are. We're the children of those immigrants, and you know, maybe we don't get to be at a conference speaking at Notre Dame, but we work, we love our families, we are loved, we engage. And one of the things Perdomo's work does is that it shows humanity in these oftentimes dehumanizing situations and conditions and says, look, feel, listen. So in thinking about both Afro-Latinx and Latinx spaces and experiences, a lot of times we don't want to look at that grimy side. We don't want to hear it. We don't like to see just how well Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, and African Americans get along, just how well the vernacular and the language crisscrosses and engages, just how well the animosity across class shines versus necessarily always racial animosity, right? Those are real things and experiences that Perdomo's work engages in. And it's one of the reasons why his work is just central to me. This is a book in progress, okay? So I decided, I said, okay, I'm gonna try this out on folks, okay? So, you know, my earnest apologies if it's a little undercooked in parts, but it's because it's part of this really long project. And I'll probably have to stop somewhere midway because it's long. So the title of the book is Poet Born in Harlem, The Poetry of Willie Perdomo. And there's a lot in here, too, I wanted to put in just about the legacy and the tradition that Perdomo is writing in when it comes to Harlem writers, right? But, you know, again, there's so much to put in. And we got between 15 and 20 minutes, so here we go. Langston Hughes wrote, "Perhaps the mission of an artist is to interpret beauty to people, the beauty within themselves." And something John said, I was going to put it in there, right? The showing reality to reality. I thought that was wonderful. Willie Perdomo's art, his poetry, did this for me. I was introduced to Perdomo's first collection, Where a Nickel Costs a Dime, when my compay checked me one day. He wanted to know where my poems were, my bars. So just sidebar, I had a hip hop group. We did a lot of shows. I was a rapper. It was dope. It was wild. I was working in corporate America, and all my juice cards were expiring. He was like, "Yo, you're starting to sound like Bob Dabalina." And I'm dating myself with this reference, but it's Del the Funky Homo Sapien. Mr. Dabalina, Mr. Bob Dabalina. That's Mr. Corporate, right? And, you know, I'm going to quote Perdomo's poem, Monkey in the Middle. And it's a poem from that same first collection where somebody says to one of the characters in the poem, "Damn, Ed, you've been around them white boys too long, brother. You done lost all the ditty in your bop." My compay gave me a cassette recording of Perdomo reading poems, and that cassette became my companion for years. And I also want to apologize if I slip into like trying to sound like Willie while I read his poems, but it's because I've just listened to them hundreds and hundreds of times. So when I started my MFA program, I turned to Perdomo's poetry yet again because I needed to hear a voice that gave itself permission to reveal that beauty Hughes is talking about, and that does so honestly, musically, and from a world that I knew. Up to that point, I hadn't read Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet. However, Perdomo's poems became those letters for me. Hardworking Mommy, Nigerican Blues, Harlem Plays the Best Ball in the World, Que Viva Chango, Papo's Ars Poetica, Brother Lowe and His Maxims, Crazy Bunch Barbecue, characters like Pete, Kryptonite, Papo, and all the rest. I knew them from my own great street. I knew and still know the power of that street talk to reveal the nitty and the gritty of everyday life. And Perdomo's work taught me that all of it is poetry, that I need not contrive anything. In the first poem of Perdomo's most recent book, The Crazy Bunch, Papo says, "Bro, poems were falling from the rooftops, flailing out the windows. Sometimes you'd pick up the corner payphone and a poem would be calling, collect." I read in a textbook somewhere that literature is a long conversation engaged in over the course of many lifetimes. And that if you're a writer, you're trying to introduce your voice into that conversation. And I agree with that. However, if you're a writer, you're also trying to leave an opening for another writer who may not believe they belong in the room. Willie Perdomo has left that door open for me, and for my fellow poets at this conference, to be sure, and for countless others. Way back in April 2014, I hustled my way up East 103rd Street to the now defunct La Casa Azul bookstore. Willie Perdomo was the featured reader and scheduled to read from his eagerly anticipated collection, The Essential Hits of Shorty Bonbon. The joint was packed with students, bibliophiles, and folks you could easily recognize as Perdomo's people. They welcomed him back like the prodigal son, the love in the room tangible and electric. And even though I'd listened to Perdomo's voice countless times on my Walkman and my iPod, as he read from Where a Nickel Costs a Dime and Smoking Lovely and Shorty Bonbon, that day 8 years ago would be my first time seeing him in the flesh. and he did not disappoint. After a spirited reading in his booming Harlem lilt, the host invited the audience to a Q&A session. A young woman stepped up, announced herself as an MFA student at a local college, and explained that she had so many stories to tell. Stories about her life, her family, and so much more. She asked Perdomo how he makes space for all the voices and stories in his books. Perdomo's answer has impacted my creative process to this day and has helped me shape my own poetry collections. In part, he replied, and I'm paraphrasing, that many times a writer needs to create a guide. Someone to guide the writer, and when necessary, the reader. The journey is longer on your own. You need help getting across that river. A guide is many things to a poem. The short list that follows is not exhaustive, but particular to Perdomo's work. First, they are a physical guide you must follow because they have an intimate knowledge of the landscape, its characters, and most importantly, the narrative thread. This knowledge establishes the guide's credibility. Perdomo's Papo the Poet, Will, Skinnicky, Willie, an amalgamation of the alternating first person and omniscient speaker, leads the pilgrim reader through his works. Perdomo's Harlem is the firmament the poems are built upon. And as Rilke urges, seek those which your own everyday life offers you. Describe your sorrows and desires, passing thoughts in the belief in some sort of beauty. Describe all these with loving, quiet, humble sincerity, and use to express yourself the things in your environment, the images from your dreams, and the objects of your memory. The guide also serves as our collective conscious and our collective unconscious, bridging the world of the pilgrim reader and the world of the poem via shared emotions, experiences, instincts, and archetypes. Characters from Where a Nickel Costs a Dime, Brother Lo, Nisi, Doña Rosa, Mami, the Crazy Bunch, represent the wisdom of the down and out, innocence lost, the overwhelming urge to protect one's children and offer them unconditional love, and the brotherhood, sisterhood of the streets. In Perdomo's work, the guide is also a kind of teacher, pointing the way to unseen knowledge and understanding that tear down barriers created by isms and phobias. The poetry represents human beings in dehumanizing conditions, yet trying to hang on to their dignity. In poetry, the guide must be in possession of a unique voice. As the late Tony Hoagland writes in the introduction to The Art of Voice, Poetic Principles and Practice, a book he co-authored with the poet Kay Cosgrove. In many poems, voice is the mysterious atmosphere that makes it memorable, that holds it together and aloft, like the womb around an embryo. Voice can be more primary than any story or idea the poem contains, and voice carries the cargo forward to delivery. When we hear a distinctive voice in a poem, our full attention is aroused and engaged, because we suspect that here, now, at last, we may learn how someone else does it. That is, how they live, breathe, think, feel, and talk. Perdomo's guides have an authentic Nuyorican voice and a specific Harlem diction, a blend of Spanglish, metaphor, signifying associative leaps, and African-American vernacular that recreates the energy, the melting pot, and I hate to use that term, but I couldn't think of anything else at the time, and complexity of uptown. We must also acknowledge Perdomo's roots as a performance poet and how the oral nature of this early work contributes to authenticating the guide's voice and those of the characters present in the poem. During a recent reading for Perdomo's The Crazy Bunch, the legendary Felipe Luciano took to the podium at the Caribbean Cultural Center and African Diaspora Institute and declared that Perdomo's language is Harlem, that you need to be from Harlem to recognize his genius. And as Major Jackson keenly observed, to compose these poems in any speech other than his indigenous street lingo would be tantamount to compromising his vision. Perdomo lets loose with a flow that is unmistakably Black Spanglish, East Spanish Harlem, USA. Perhaps the most famous poet guide is Dante's Virgil, who leads Dante through hell, purgatory, and paradise. We could think of Perdomo's guides in a similar way after a fashion. Harlem is what they know, what they eat, sleep, and breathe. The raw slices of street and the drugs, death, and destiny of Perdomo's Harlem are a man-made hell because, as the last poets told us, the white man's got a God complex. From the Great Migration to Puerto Rican migration during World War II, to the crack and heroin epidemics, to the resulting mass incarceration of the 1994 Violent Crime Bill, Harlem's hell is carefully crafted by police brutality, institutional racism, classism, and the lack of effective policy that considers the living, breathing people who will be impacted by it. And yet, there are levels to this. The resilient, resourceful, and beautiful take-no-shit people of Harlem have given America more culture than it deserves. As Perdomo speaker observes in Where I'm From, it's sweet, like my grandmother reciting a quick prayer over a pot of hot rice and beans. Where I'm from, it's pretty, like my niece stopping me in the middle of the street and telling me to notice all the stars in the sky. Dante Alighieri's Virgil is also considered prophetic. Robert Hollander, Princeton professor of European literature, writes that Virgil conveys solemn moments of explicitly prophetic utterance. Dante's reimagining of history is different from Perdomo's witnessing of the living moment. However, from 1996, where Nickel cost a dime, to 2003, Smoking Lovely, Perdomo's guide chronicles and prophesies the aftermath of the drug and incarceration apocalypse in poems like Clyde, Funeral, Hustler Song, Smoking Lovely, to name a few. As a witness myself, excuse me, I can attest that what Perdomo writes is how it happened. How we doing? We all right? Perhaps no poem is as emblematic of Perdomo's guide in the complexity of his narration as Last Junkie poem. The speaker's shifting point of view, that of guide and that of witness, is masterfully at work within its lines. The combination of first-person point of view and direct speech with indirect speech and third-person omniscient point of view allows the speaker on his way to bring the reader in and on his way to a clinic to set the stage and then also become the characters. Observe the first two stanzas. The last poem I write about a junkie will be the one he steals as I ride the bus early in the afternoon from the east to the west side. Hair like Medusa's, he stops in a barber shop, strolling his dusty 19-inch on a rickety-rackety stroller, rusting at the wheels. Black and white TV, baby stroller, you got a baby, baby? I'll give you the TV for free. The first person point of view sets the scene. I'm riding the bus, perhaps on my way to the methadone clinic. And this is what I see. The omniscient third-person point of view allows the speaker to introduce multiple characters, voices, and other points of view. In this case, the first example of direct speech is the first voice we hear other than the poet, the junkie's voice, peddling a stolen television. In the next stanza, bus vrooms past Levin's drugstore. Look, a honey-hued cutie skipping into the library, half day in Harlem, and her thighs are thick, knees knocking under her black and blue plaid skirt. She probably one of those goody-good rich girls from Hamilton Terrace, is what the bad boy in the Yankee baseball cap said, ready to roll 3 green dice against the church wall. Oh, you know what? I'm like, I got this thing on. 5 E4 better, 10 E don't. I got 10, 10 in it. Finger snapper, woo, she bad. Roll, one day, boy. One day, she gonna be mine. Head crack, baby. Drop all that cream. From the junkie back to the poet, an omniscient third-person point of view, bus rooms past Levin's drugstore to the indirect speech. She probably one of them goody-good rich girls of the bad boy in the Yankee baseball cap. The shift to indirect speech is frenetic. This energetic and quick shifting point of view creates a blended consciousness, a speaker and guide who contains the multitudes he sees daily. When combined with the language of Harlem, that very specific diction and syntax recreate the rhythm of the streets. The result is the speed of life in New York City expressed through language. The bad boy is gambling with dice, and in between rolls, doubles the stakes from 5 to 10, inspired by the honey-hued cutie skipping into the library. We must point out Perdomo's very specific description, skipping into the library. This signifies that she is underage, a child, already endangered by New York's notorious street sexual harassment. The mention of her thighs as already thick after half day in Harlem attests to the environment being dangerous for young girls, one in which they are perceived as ready for sexual relationships. Grown up is forced upon them. Just before he rolls the dice, the bad boy cries, "One day she gonna be mine." In the next stanza, that statement proves somewhat prophetic. And y'all let me know how I'm doing on time, because I'm just reading, okay? Yeah? Somebody else for a girl named Nisi. Nisi! Nisi! Dashing into the Dominican deli, passing the schoolgirl, hot pink fake leather slippers starting to peel in the concrete. The sun don't shine for that girl no more. No one knows her secret like the old man who promised her bubble gum. All she had to do was follow him to the roof so he could show her his bird kingdom. Ask the old man what happened and he'll say, "I ain't have nothing but hard dick and bubble gum, and I was fresh out of bubble gum." The threat leveled against the schoolgirl in the previous stanza became reality for Nisi. Both instances of direct speech signal the community's knowledge of what happened to her and by extension other young girls, and perhaps even the tendency toward victim blaming, the gossipy "sun don't shine for that girl," and the callousness of men and "I was fresh out of bubble gum." The schoolgirl and Nisi pass each other, past, present, and possible future. Running out the deli with a carton of milk cradled in her arms, first Newport of the day dangling from her lips, Nisi wants to know what moves me to my notepad. Love poems. Shit. Love poems don't pay the rent. Love poems don't pay for the milk. Can't eat no love poems. Gotta come stronger than that, baby. Nisi's skepticism towards love and love poems is palpable and filled with loathing. To Nisi, the speaker's belief in love poems come off as naive and reminds her of the innocence that was stolen from her. There's only stark reality now. Perdomo's Harlem is a world where men are either absent or replaced by adolescents who want to be men before they're ready. The women, both young and old, alternate between being the wreckage and carrying the wreckage the boy men leave behind. And I think I'll stop there because it got away from me, my bad. Thank you.
Hey, y'all. Hey. I'm so happy to be here with you. I want to thank, first, Jasminne and Roberto. These papers are amazing. I want to read that book. I need that essay in my life. I have learned so much. And Jasenia and John and Daryl, and all the scholars, y'all are amazing. Amazing. This is such a delight. I'm gonna stick to what I've written because I'm real tight. So I want to thank the Institute for Latino Studies and the Initiative on Race and Resilience, the University here of Notre Dame, Francisco Aragon, who is an institution builder, right? Who is a visionary and supports us in so many ways. And all the people, so many people that brought us all together and that are engaging wherever they are. So here we go. I've been dreaming a long time of this moment. I've seen the expansiveness of your faces, an ocean of you here and rippling beyond, a sky beyond sky, all the world pulsing in water currents, all our beings rippling like droplets of rain on a lake, listening. I have been dreaming this moment when I get to tell you about Dr. Alán Pelaez López. My analysis on their poetic lines and a shared wonder, a shared disruption against commodification and control towards a new imagining of freedom, perhaps even an arrival at maroon home space across galaxies. I'll be rooting my talk in their first book, Intergalactic Travels, Poems from a Fugitive Alien. So the metaphor of migration towards a community in which Black life flourishes without need of papers and documents to prove one's worthiness is apt. Doctore Alán Pelaez López, they traveled across lines that exist on maps made by hands that always seek to crush the contours of the world. What are borders to spirit? We learned from Jasminne yesterday about the radical love and the possibility and the cartography of our interconnectedness, all beings rather than the political map in which a pointing finger must always crush someone. When I asked Alán what one word would encapsulate their work, they said, imagination. Imagine. Get ready, y'all, we're about to fly, but before I do, I have to acknowledge the ancestral stewards on this land. And for those who are listening and participating, I have been practicing deeply pronunciations, and I may get them wrong, and please forgive me. My intention is to honor. I acknowledge our presence in the traditional homelands of the Native peoples, including the Haudenosaunee, the Miami, the Peoria, all of the Potawatomi, the Potawatomi peoples, and particularly the Pocagnic, Potawatomi, Pokagon, Potawatomi, who have been using this land for education for thousands of years and continue to do so. I'm so honored to be in this space. I also gratefully acknowledge the Afro-Zapotec community into which Dr. Alán Pelaez López was born and nurtured, a community by the Pacific Ocean at the base of La Sierra Madre de Oaxaca, in which the language and culture and persistence of both are a daily resiliency and strength, counter to the constant push of eraser. As Yomara reminded us yesterday, Blackness was always core to Latinidad. Reading from their bio, Alán is an Afro-Indigenous poet, installation and adornment artist from Oaxaca, Mexico. They are the author of Intergalactic Travels, Poems from a Fugitive Alien, and the chapbook To Love and Mourn in the Age of Displacement. Pelaez López's honors include nominations for a pushcard and Best of the Net, as well as fellowships and residencies at the Museum of the African Diaspora in the Bay Area, Brown University. Their work has been published in Best American, Experimental Writing, Poetry, Teen Vogue, among others. And they were just named a Ruth Lilly and Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Poetry Fellow, among the largest and most prestigious awards available for young poets in the United States. I first met Alán on the page in that process of applying for a position with the Museum of the African Diaspora. And I was so incredibly moved by the attentiveness of their workshops and the care that I knew that they would have within the workshop space. I felt the love, even in the conception of like, this is what I can hold space for. And this is who I am, the urgency of their work. And I'll tell you this small story, which is that at the end of that program, there is a reading of the poets involved. And at that time, my son was maybe 4 months. And I had taken him in the bassinet, I was at the museum, and I had attended to all the things. He was fed, he had been changed, he had slept, all the things. He was a happy baby before we started that reading. He was not a happy baby by the time I was gonna read. And so it's me, bouncing Fele, and just, he gave me 5 minutes of my 10 minutes and then was like, my contribution to this performance is screaming, screaming. And so I was like, okay, that's the end of this performance, excellent. But at the end of the time together, Alán held my baby. And this very ordinary child suddenly became different, had the sense of Alán being the being of light that they are. They are a being of light who also, at 5, crossed an arbitrary line alone. They have known the swirling darkness of the world, refashioning the terms alien and fugitive into the conception of intergalactic migration, otherworldliness of undocu-Black migration with its ruptures and loss and futurity. Their body and being under constant threat, Black, queer, formerly undocumented. In their work, they dare to find the parallels between migration experiences on on the undocumented Black peoples and indigenous peoples. And how they have answered that existential threat is through movement working, organizing, collecting the stories of other undocumented Black queer folks. They have created art in defiance of colonial scraping away of one's humanity, knowledge, feelings, and life. And this daring might be the spark among many sparks to save those very things. So I'm going to play you a clip from Alán speaking about their work, and then I'll talk some more about it.
And I also think that there is something really important that we don't talk about in the migrant community, and that's the fact that sometimes when one is undocumented, it is hard to prioritize romance and love. And I want us to talk about that. I think that we need to talk about romance and love, that we remind ourselves that we are allowed to have romantic relationships, that we are allowed to lean on pleasure and open up ourselves to an erotic life. I know that some folk are asexual, and that doesn't mean that they can't have relationships, right? That just means that they're asexual. And pleasure comes in many ways. And although this poem is pretty difficult for me to share, I think it's so important for me to share it. And I also want to show it to you so that you can, if you want to read along, you can read along. I know that it's small, but actually, let me make it bigger so that you can read along and prioritize the poem.
Look at it.
And it's written inside an immigration form. I'll read the question. Have you or any member of your family included in the application ever committed any crime and or been arrested, charged, convicted, or sentenced for any crimes in the United States? Yes. If yes, for each instance, specify in your response what occurred and the circumstances, dates, length of sentence received, location, the duration of the detention or imprisonment, reasons for the detention or conviction, any formal charges that were lodged against you or your relatives included in your application, and the reasons for release. Attach documents referring to these incidents if they are available, or any explanation of why documents are not available. And my response to this intrusive, surveilling question is the following. I met a boy when I was 19. He had a scar below his left nipple. When I asked him how he got it, he covered it with his digits and said, when I crossed. That's when I told him I loved him for crossing, loved him for living, loved him for sharing, loved him for trusting, loved him for reminding me we are human, loved him for honesty, loved him for stories, loved him for poetry. I met a boy when I was 19. He had spent 2 years, 17 days in a detention center. I swore to set the border on fire. I met a boy when I was 19. And we did immoral things. We are criminals, sir. Take me, 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 me.
What happens when we do not know how to mourn? When we create a brick wall against it? When we recognize that mourning might lead an ocean to rise up, take the body, all bodies, the soul, the land, in a rageful sorrow? What about the fissures and ruptures? And how can we respond to that document? Push against the document. Document the passionate love, a feeling that defies all that was taken and lost, including the numbness of survival. The poem is a treatise on traveling the craggy path of mourning for one's own healing, a poem of witness and resistance through story, archive, explorations of the erotic and daring. The poem pushes against the confines of the immigration document to document love. It leans into a defiant love, a plaintive love, a passionately queer love for the beloved who has survived. And the poem is also a sustaining love for the self who crossed and survived and is still surviving against the box of criminality of being. And so I wanted to show you some more of their work in the space of document, in the space of creating visualizations of love, and defiance of illegality, defiance of control. And this creation of an altar, right? And the repetition of, I want the world to love us and hold us. I want the world to love us and hold us. These are some of the pieces within their book. I'm going to shift into thinking about water. Everyone who knows me knows I'm a little obsessed with that element. If you were to hold a glass of water, what stories do they, and when I say they in this context, I'm speaking of water, carry within them? There is being in the water, many generations of story, passage, cleansing, emergence, and restoring your water with water. What memories and healing do you take in? The water cleanses, they transmute, make way, shape, guide, carry along, and carry away. In conversation with Daryl Alejandro Rojones the other day, he talked about one's worthiness not needing to be solely linked to archive, the evidence of one's humanity. In Alán's dissertation work, they also wrote about how one rainstorm splintered their ancestral home, the archive of their existence gone to the elements, and how their grandmother had already given them this truth, that the mountains, la Sierra Madre, will always know them. What a gift that is from one generation to another to say the world may deny all the beauty of you, and the waters rise and fall, and papers be lost, or offer only an intrusive violence in a box, but what faulty symbols they are. Your existence will be scribed in the geologic record of the place, and the mountains will always celebrate your return. So I have this exploration of Alán's work, which comes from Sick in America, and the text is such that it has a prose block and footnotes. And for me, it reads like a scholarly exploration of form, but counter the capitalization. There's no a capital I, for example, it becomes a collective I. And those footnotes have the position of a scholarly piece, but they also seem to me a scoring for performance. And so I'm going to play you just a little bit of this video that I made in connection with that. So you see it on the page. Before the crossing, our family could understand the whispers of the water. We bathed our cuerpos morenos as if we were holy, as if our humanity was valuable, as if we were worth life. It is hard to remember anything before the crossing. How do I tell myself I had a childhood if at the age of 5 I am a fugitive of the law? It would be easier to remember life before the crossing if we didn't become paralyzed for the rest of our lives. The doctor tells me I have post-traumatic stress disorder. He says it is because I am an immigrant, but that in a few years I will be American. Before the crossing, during the crossing, we were faced with the reality of what it means to be black, an Indian, in an empire that constantly measures us on production. Our blood a sustenance for those who deem us illegal. Family could understand the water the whispers of the has water. Been cut through by wooden logs that demand family we show them papers that of the say water. We are not family poor, could understand the whispers Indian of the water. Black. We bathed our cuerpos morenos as if we were holy. Location. As if our I'm going to stop us there. So I'll tell you a little bit about the poem. Oh, maybe? Okay. Yes. So the poem, in reading it, I imagine it as both the disruption of the prose poem form with its scholarly notes and scoring a polyvocal performance. The footnotes serve as essayistic explorations of the existential, explicit practice and citation of Black scholarship. The poem also opens to the multiplicities of collective commonalities in story connected by the specificity of the one, Alán's story. It is also an invitation to performance. The poem shifts into that collective I mentioned by abandoning the singularity of the I capital. A single tree in a spread field, no, Alán says, this I is shared in a field of many others, pay attention. What do we lose in crossing from one place to another? From a break in home space to survive, I think of the family connectedness and grieving in this first line. Thank you, John and Francisco, for inviting me to think more deeply about grieving and mourning, the regard for the wonder that was lost and the attunement of the human body to the elemental and the holy, right? This elemental, and the holy. Because one's humanity carried the value of life, unable to be quantified beyond the exchange of currency or the fixation of a value in exchange in production or exploitation. And there are this moment here. Tell me, when did your childhood end? What was the moment? For the speaker of this poem, it ended with fugitivity. How can a child who crosses an imagined line, arbitrary, one that has changed over generations, one that is political, a blip that itself will go unrecorded in geologic history, be a fugitive? Yet that identification also has power to change the body, to block memory, to influence one's remembrance of self and water. The doctor ultimately seems to imply that one's PTSD will dissipate and cede way to a different, perhaps opposite scripting when the speaker becomes an American. The doctor seems to imply, too, that power has the power to erase trauma. And in this silence, what is implied, that this power of erasure is subject to the power to inflict trauma as well. One's healing does not come from recognition of the self. And the healing of the self, the doctor implies, it comes from taking on a new mantle of control of others. This is what the poet names as sickness. Do you want to be well? It's a question, right? Do you want to be well? In this poem, the freedom and life of elemental alignment is about attunement. It is not about control. The last line of the prose block. Freedom is defined by an external force, one which has a power in itself, that of the medical establishment to give or deny aid. Freedom from this institution, as represented by the doctor figure, is again about power, control, domination, even into the imagination that makes what was holy. The brown body, cuerpos morenos, fugitive. And there is an opposite to the dominant sculpting of the fugitive, to a counter-narrative that Alán takes of fugitivity that counters that American identity of control and power and domination. Dream and power can lead to a wellness, only when interwoven with, when perhaps unwoven from the sicknesses of capitalism, racism, imperialism, and patriarchy. And I'll offer you this last note. The entire book is filled with these poems. They're so rich. And each poem reveals the inextricable weaving of lightness, of flight, of love, of passion becoming resistance, loss, grief, struggle. It's all scripted within memory and the page of the body, the importance of the body, calling attention to the body and all the bodies that have lost their spirits, have died along the way that nobody is paying attention to, presenting the value of the being and the body against the evidentiary document and the archive. It ain't about that. It is about people. It is about beings. It is about our world and interconnectedness. That is what Alán teaches us. Even the dream space has its scars. And the mountain remembers, the water speaks, and the universe opens for the possibility of welcome, holding with care, and loving us. Thank y'all.
Wow. Questions? We have time for a few questions. John.
Oh, thank you. So, thank you. Those were just such beautiful and moving presentations. And I just want to try to articulate a question about a thread that I saw running through all three of the talks. And it has to do with something that I think about a lot because of a course that I teach. And this thread is about the relationship between critique and joy, or critique and beauty. So I was thinking about, Jasminne, in your presentation at the very beginning when you were talking about finding this resonance with Dianelly's work, in that it supplied a vision of being more than just our sadness and our suffering. And then, Roberto, in your presentation about the way you were using that Langston Hughes quote and seeing the sort of vitality of life in Harlem, right, even in kind of challenging circumstances. And Raina, in your presentation, I was thinking, there's that moment where Alán is talking about where's the place for romance and love, right, that they're calling attention to. Again, it sounded to me like we're more than just our sadness and our suffering. Mm-hmm. So it's just, I was wondering, I would love to hear you comment a little bit about, it seems like sometimes the project of critique can feel so overwhelming and so urgent and necessary, but where you see in the poets that you're working on, or even in your own work, the necessity or the urgency of beauty, joy, romance, right, as part of the work that these poets or that you see yourselves engaged in.
I mean, I don't think any of us would be poets if we didn't believe in beauty. That's what we're trying. I mean, I can't speak for all poets, or I'll speak for myself. But I think this idea of that's why we come to poetry, because we can play with language and use language to create something beautiful out of something not very beautiful, right? Finding ways to reconcile with the ugly of life through this language that fails us time and time again, right? Both English, Spanish, all of these languages, sometimes, at least for me, are not enough to convey what I need to convey, but you continue to play, you continue to toy with that. And you're calling attention to, I don't know if I would use the word critique. There's plenty of passion and anger and criticism in a lot of the things that I write and things that I've heard others write. But I think it's a matter of, you're also calling attention to it. Like, look at this. We're not paying attention to this thing. And we need to be seeing it, or we're seeing it, but we're only seeing it from this angle. And poetry allows us to look under, around, behind, in front of, inside, to look at the thing from all angles, right? That includes like the beauty and the ugliness of it, and the hauntingness of it, the sorrow of it, whatever it is. And I think that's why many of us come to poetry in the first place. We do have these things that, yeah, perhaps we are critiquing or investigating and meditating on and questioning. And then we find the language to talk about it. But I think always from that place of like, language is, such like a wonderful thing, even with its flaws and its failings and its, especially in Spanish, sort of like binary, ways of existing. And yeah, that's what I think. I don't know.
I'm still processing.
Am I? Can you hear me? I think in my question, my follow-up question is, are you thinking about the attentiveness that we have cultivated in the presentation, or in the nurturing of the balance between critique and beauty and joy and love in the creative process, in the work that we are creating or that we know in others?
I was just responding to
Yeah, of course, for sure. For me, I found such great wonder in looking at Alán's work for the maneuvers that are happening within it, and how they approach form and against form, and creating of new spaces for meaning making, especially within the visual space. and using the page as canvas. I was talking with a class group about that today, while also revealing the layers of struggle and grieving and mourning and risk and loss and threat, absolute threat against their lives, measured against the love. And it may be in the space of wonder, like, how do you do that? like John was saying the other day, right? Which was a T.S. Eliot quote around, like, you know, what was it? Great poets steal. Like, that's the end of the quote, right? And Alán is already a great poet. Like, that's just their way of being in the world. And I want to learn how they hold those multiplicities of tensions, which we've talked about even just yesterday, right? All in the same space. And you saw the one poem, it's a really tight prose poem, right? And just the footnotes alone are wonders. And how, like, history and personal narrative, as well as, like, explorations of freedom. Like, there's a lot within a line, even in a footnote, which for so many folks, people will be like, oh, footnotes, like, or endnote. Footnote. I'm not gonna really worry about that. That's not really that important, and yet it reveals so much. Anyway, I'm going on. Does that give you enough time?
No, I'm not. Yeah. No, you know, I agree with everything that Jasminne and Raina said. I also think that when poets write criticism, or what is construed as criticism, whether it be in academia or whatever, it's incumbent upon us to do this because we recognize the technical elements and craft elements that the writer, you know, that they went through to try to produce, to make this work. And we know how to appreciate that, but because we're also poets, we know how to recognize what maybe traditionally academic critics would not look at, and simply kind of focus on those elements that are the technical elements, and quote unquote, you know, we don't look at the hearty stuff and the soul stuff, but we do. And so, yeah, it's a constant tightrope, I think, that we're trying to navigate between, you know, admiration for how you did what you did and what you're talking about, and especially if it connects subject matter thematically wise, but then also giving that poet their due for what they've made is critical. So it's always this fine line that you know, and if I'm repeating in a different way what they said, I'm sorry, but I think that's. Yeah.
So in essence, more poets and scholars should be in conversation. We should co-write things.
Yes,
for sure, right? Like like looking at the same poem and reading it alongside one another and in conversation. Like that's the thing. Who's gonna publish that? Who's gonna do that? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, agreed. We got two.
I'm gonna have to be a bad cop right now.
Oh, okay.
Because I want us to take a break so that when we hear the scholars, we're refreshed.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've been going on for almost an hour and a half, so let's pause for the 15 minutes that we have allotted. So it's 3:23. 15 minutes from now, let's give our attention to the scholars. Okay?
Yeah.
Thank you.